You're listening to the Public Health Entrepreneurs Podcast with your host, Dr. Charlotte Huntley. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this episode. On this podcast, we talk about all things related to supporting you at this intersection of public health and entrepreneurship. My name is Dr. Charlotte Huntley, and I'm your host. I'm a public health entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in both healthcare and public health, and I've supported many entrepreneurs along the way. On this podcast, which is relatively new, I want you to remember that I've been podcasting since 2017. So I bring passion and a little bit of a skill set to this relatively new podcast, but we're already well underway. This is episode 17 that I'm recording right now. I want to dive into the topic, answering another question that I receive quite frequently. And it's along the lines of, should I start a podcast? So we're going to dive into it. I actually thought it would be helpful to just kind of break it down into some pros and cons. I am biased. I say that up front. I absolutely love podcasting. When I started in 2017, I released episodes every Tuesday on my first podcast, which is Public Health Epidemiology Conversations. And right now we're over 350 episodes released, and it's been every single Tuesday on that podcast. On this podcast, we have started out with a cadence of twice weekly episodes. So we have been releasing episodes twice a week, and we'll see how long we continue this pattern. We're trying to engage just the response and how our team has a nice system in place with the other podcasts. So it wasn't so difficult for us to start a second and also level it up a little bit for us for two reasons, because we do have a nice system in place to be able to do so. And also because I'm starting this so much content. Like I already know so many questions that people want answered, because people have, spent some years coaching and providing resources, trainings, courses, programs to help people get started, and to a lot of one-on-one coaching to help entrepreneurs build and grow the businesses into what they want. So I know a lot of the questions. I still get questions all the time related to getting started and finding clients and facing these challenges that we face, on this journey as public health entrepreneurs. So I have so much already that I know people want to hear about and I want to share about. And since I'm no longer doing these other programs and coaching, I'm pouring a lot out through these episodes. So because we have so much content and so much that people are waiting to hear about, and because we have the team and the structure, we thought twice a week, let's see how this goes. So we're committed to that. And we've been doing so twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. And we will continue to see how that goes. We're going to do it for the next several months, and then we'll gauge and see how everybody's feeling and how this is going and pivot from there. But overall, podcasting is an incredible platform. It's a powerful tool for public health, not just entrepreneurs, but organizations. It's a great way to disseminate information, build community, even establish authority in your field. I've helped so many organizations through my other podcasts build and connect with industry, both their ideal client types and other partners, stakeholders in the community, or industry. Podcasting is an incredible platform to me, hands down. Like I said, I am biased because I love podcasting. I absolutely love it. I didn't know until I jumped into it, but I committed to it and decided good, bad, or indifferent. I was going to stick with it for a year. And it didn't take very long for me to know that this is something I would enjoy. So as people ask me, should I start a podcast, or those kinds of questions related to, basically my advice on starting a podcast, I always tell people right up front, it is time consuming, but it is very rewarding. It's not a quick overnight fix to, connect to your next client, but it definitely can go a long way. So I'm going to spend some time talking about on this podcast. So we're going to talk about whether or not, like, the pros and cons of podcasting. Let's jump into that. I thought that was the best way, instead of, I know I can't answer for you, but I'll share some of my favorite pros, and then I'll be very honest about some of the cons. All right, the pros of podcasting. One of the things to really highlight here is the reach. I've been blown away realizing the reach of my podcasts. You are able to reach people around the world if they're interested in your topic and want to hear from you. But if you set your podcast up right, it goes out to anyone who's listening on podcast apps. Most people have some sort of mobile phone or they have access. So for us, if you are doing a typical podcast setup, you will be able to get your podcast show into any of the apps like Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, it used to be Google Podcasts, but there's no longer, but YouTube Music, Spotify. There's so many podcasting apps. So people who like to listen to podcasts, you have your favorite app. And if you have a show, people can Google that or can search your show title and find your show, follow it. And then every time you release a new episode, they're going to be alerted and they'll hear it. So people can be anywhere in the world. If they have one of those apps and access to one of those apps, then they can listen to your podcast. People can listen to it through websites. If they have internet service, then they're able to, usually with your podcast, you have some sort of a website and they can go to that website and listen. So if they're not using the apps, they can listen from a website. It lowers the barrier of access and entry for people to be able to access the information that you want to share. I'm recording and releasing my podcast from the United States. Even with this brand new podcast, I already know that we're reaching multiple countries. We see our analytics and can tell where people are listening from. So we at least know people are listening from other countries besides the United States. That's phenomenal. So I think it's great. If you are listening from another country besides the United States, reach out to us and let us know. You can comment on one of our social media posts or just come to our website, publichealthentrepreneurs.com, and let us know. Actually, the best way you can do is write a review and then let us know where you're listening from. But I think that fascinates me. I know with our other podcasts, I enjoy the same. So a huge pro for podcasting is the reach. People that I would not be able to just bump into at the grocery store and the mall. These are people around the world for me. Authority building. You can really establish that, put a few caveats here, consistently producing your episodes and showing up for the people who follow you and like what you're sharing and decided that you're worth subscribing to or following and tuning in consistently. You build credibility when you are consistent. Then they begin to trust you. I know that there's some shows that I plan my morning walk because I want to listen to those podcast episodes, or I plan around when they're going to release a new episode. So I get used to that cadence and it's into your schedule and your lifestyle. So it's a way to establish authority, build credibility, really build a relationship with people. And you become trusted among your listeners. So it goes a long way. So building authority is huge when you are consistent and putting, out good content and information. The engagement, just like I'm asking you to engage with us on, social media, you can move your listeners from the podcasting app to engaging with you across social media or across your other content, information or programs that you may have. I think that engaging through reviews is nice just because I know that's going to help our show grow too. People like to see the reviews, but it's a great way. I read every single review. Like this show is new, but we have a review already, which I read in a previous episode. And I'm excited to see, who's going to take the time to leave a review for us. We read that, I read those, my team reads those. Same thing with social media. If you comment on one of the posts about our episodes, then, that's a way to engage with us. I guess I'll add to that too. As a podcaster, you have to remember, from my point of view, I'm putting out this content. When I'm recording these episodes, I'm imagining that we're in a room together and I'm talking to you across the room. And that hopefully conveys this relatable conversational tone and this sense of connecting with me. Because I know most of us are I'm looking for my AirPods here. We put these earbuds in our ears and we're walking and listening to a podcast earlier. So that's an intimate conversation. I'm in your ear. You're listening to me and you're following this conversation and hopefully you're feeling somewhat of a connection. So that is a huge part of building authority and connecting and engagement. That's a way to feel connected to your audience. So those are huge pros. Flexibility. Podcast offers a lot of flexibility in the content creation. So you can have a show where all of your episodes are solos, just you. So far on this podcast, it's just been me talking to you and sharing with you in sort of a coaching style or an encouraging, like announcement style. But pretty soon I'm going to invite some guests. So you'll get to experience that conversation with myself and a guest. So you can decide to have a show that's a mixture of like just solo, just you talking, or you and a guest sharing on a topic. You may have a one or the other, or your blend of the two, or you can have multiple guests on your show. So you get to decide how you want to do that. You can cover a wide range of topics, or you can cover very niche category of topics. You can decide that it's going to be entertaining or educational or informative. You get to decide. There's a lot of flexibility there. You even get to decide how you do your recording. For my team, we typically will batch up a lot of the work. So you can do a lot of your solo episodes at one time, or a lot of your interviews at one time, and then mix those up into the schedule and sprinkle them out at a cadence that suits you. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you create the content and schedule it out. So you have to find your own system that works. I like that flexibility. I've heard a lot of my podcasting friends who want to take a block of time off, then they'll batch up and get things ready ahead of time on their podcast. I've done this myself, so that you're free to schedule a lot of it out, and you're free to do other things without having to be in front of the microphone every single week or every time you record. You don't have to do it one at a time. Some people like to do it that way too. So there's just a lot of flexibility. And I think that's a real pro. That's a real benefit, in my opinion. And then finally, I'm going to add here, under the pros of podcasting, is monetization. The ability to monetize a podcast is a huge pro, especially for public health entrepreneurs. You're getting started. Sometimes you don't even know where you're going with your business. And I started initially with my first podcast. I wasn't quite sure what I was building. I knew I was open to that, but I was following what people were asking for and looking for, and where I saw the need. So the ability to monetize is a huge benefit, and you can do that through sponsorships and advertising, any number of ways. And I'm going to dive more deeply into that in a separate episode that will come right after this one. So I'm going to keep moving to cons. All right. I'm just going to touch on these because I really love podcasting, but I do want you to be aware of some cons, and these are real. There's no sugarcoating this. The first con that I'm going to mention here is, I say it right up front to people who ask me about it is extremely time consuming. And even with the best automation and the best practices, it is time consuming. It will take time and or a lot of your resources. So if you want to take your time factor out of the work of the episodes, whether it's the editing or the planning or creating the graphics or writing the show notes or whatever, editing the episodes, whatever that is, if you're putting your time into doing it yourself, which I don't recommend, it's a lot of work, or you're going to use your resources to pay someone else to do it for you. So it takes time to put together a good quality episode. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to be a good quality, the best that you can put out for the good user experience. So that's something to definitely consider. It is a bit of a competitive landscape now, not so much when I started in 2017, but there is now. So this is another con in a sense. It means that, it definitely puts a little bit of pressure on you to produce a higher quality episode, maybe compared to back in the day when there wasn't as much competition. There really wasn't as much pressure to kind of raise the bar on the quality of the episodes. Always recommended. But so now it's a little bit more competitive. There's plenty more podcasts. A lot get started, but not too many, go the long haul, lasting. But that's something to consider. Consistency is definitely a con. And so in terms of, there is a real challenge for being consistent. I brag about the fact that I've been every single Tuesday on my first podcast, every single Tuesday since 2017. That is huge because it is not easy to be consistent long-term. So finding a way to maintain a consistent schedule for release is really important for your user and building trust, like I mentioned earlier, but just know that that's a real challenge that I'd like to see you address up front before you even start. Like, how are you going to stay consistent? What is your plan? I will say that another con would be some technical challenges. For some, that's no big deal. For others, it may be a big deal. So it's something to think about. Poor audio quality is never, I don't recommend it. I don't think it's well tolerated anymore because now there are too many options for you to get and have good audio quality for your episodes. So whatever that looks like for you, I recommend trying to get. Now, again, I'm not talking about perfection, but trying to do the best that you can to provide a good quality audio experience for your listeners is a high priority, but that's also a challenge. So that's a bit of on my list of cons, but it's just really more watch outs, I should say, instead of cons. These are more like watch outs or things to be aware of. These are real challenges to address before you start. And then I guess one more thing I would add to this is the ability to measure success of your show is a little tricky. There's been a lot going into kind of the universal approach to podcast analytics in the last couple of years, and we still have a long ways to go with that. So you have to find a way to measure success and what that looks like for you and your show. And I think that when you figure that out, for example, I never compare my show to other shows, not in terms of my numbers and downloads, maybe to get inspired, to do better on quality or layout, whatever. But in terms of the analytics and measurements of success, I don't measure my show against another show, somebody else's show. I measure my episodes against previous episodes so that I'm competing with myself in a sense, but I feel like it's a better comparison if I'm improving, based on what I'm changing or not changing from week to week or month to month. So those are my pros and cons, or more pros and watch outs for podcasting. If you're thinking about a podcast for your business or as your output in a way that you want to express your thought leadership, I will say it's easy to get started, not so easy to maintain and to be consistent without a strategy. So work those strategy around these things I've mentioned as watch outs. Hopefully you were taking a few notes if this is something you're thinking about doing, or just rewind and listen again to that part. But those are things, if you can put those together in your strategy for getting started, then you can just kind of get excited about some of the benefits that you'll be able to reap as your show grows. Now, we have an awesome mastermind program that I've been speaking about lately, and we only have enrollment open 2 times a year. So I'm speaking about it a little bit more right now because we're actually close to that enrollment period. But the only way that you have the opportunity or you're invited to join is if you apply for membership. That lets us know that you've read through the details and information, and this looks like something that would be a good fit for you and you want to learn more. So that is what we do. We go to the people that have applied and we follow up and make sure that you have all the information, details, answers to your questions before we actually open that enrollment. And then we invite you, those of you who have applied, to become a member if it looks like it's a mutually good fit. So I invite you to visit publichealthentrepreneurs.com. And when you're there, click on Mastermind Program, and that'll take you right to that page. All of the information, so much of what I could think of to include that would answer the immediate questions that you may have is there. And then if that looks good to you, apply, and then we'll follow up and speak more specifically and see if it's a good fit. Again, share this podcast. Help us continue to grow. So you can share our website with a friend or colleague or with your network broadly, or you can write a review if you're enjoying these episodes. I would appreciate that, but I honestly would appreciate anything that you do to help us grow the show and sharing this podcast as a resource. All right, everyone. Until next time, have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for listening. Visit publichealthentrepreneurs.com to learn more.